No, he shakes his head. David is going to do a presentation on Walter Baumhofer, who was often called the king of the Pulps, and he still is called the king of Pulps. But let me tell you a little about David. David is the son of Norman Saunders, who was a pulp artist himself, one of the leading pulp artists of the pulp magazine era. But besides that, David is a fine artist. He has exhibits in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum of Art. I'm just doing this from memory, Dave. Lots of airports, corporations all over the place. He also has a website, Wild American Pulp Artists. If you want to learn anything about pulp artists, I recommend you go to that site. I do all the time and print stuff from it. So he's written books, one on his dad, one on H.J. Ward, both of them published by Illustrated Press, Dan Zimmer. And I'm sure you all know about all the fine articles that he has written for Dan Zimmer's Illustration magazine.
Yeah. Let's do
Yeah. Let's do the door prize. All right. I actually made an error. I was going to do G8 and his battle as aces before the Hero Pulp presentation and do Doc Savage now because it's, he's related more to Baumhofer. But we have another audiobook from Tom Brown's Radio Archives, G8 and his battle aces, the first story, the Vatstoffel. All right, by badge numbers, we'll go to 115. 145, 179, 192. Yeah, this is working. 293. Hey, good thing I went. Yeah. All right, Tom Krabacher, the winner of G8 and its battle aces. All right, since he's hurrying me along, no more accolades about David Saunders. I give you Walter Baumhofer, king of the Pulps.
All right. Thank you all for having an interest in Walter Baumhofer. So that's Walter up there. And here he is a little bit earlier. So I'm just going to read a little of his family history to you. So Walter Martin Baumhofer was born November 1st, 1904 in Brooklyn. But his father, and he's in the center there, that's his mom and dad, was Henry Baumhofer. And he was born in 1869 in Oldenburg, Germany, and came to the United States in 1886. That's when the Statue of Liberty went up. His mother, Marie Walters, was born in 1872 in Hanover, Germany, and came to America in 1890. Now, his father, Henry, his brother's name is Walter Baumhofer. So, Walter Baumhofer is named after his uncle, not his mother's maiden name, which is Wolters, W-O-L-T-E-R-S. His parents met in Brooklyn. Neither of them was particularly skilled, but also, they were hard workers. But the father worked as a clerk at a coffee importing company. And they married on December 14th, 1898, you'll be interested to know. And they had two sons. Walter's older brother, Richard Baumhofer, was born in 1900. They lived in a small apartment on Ralph Avenue in Brooklyn. So that's brings us into 1904 when he's born. And by 1914, so he and his brother went to public schools in New York. And but there was a strong anti-German sentiment in 1914, and his father lost his job, and as an unskilled guy, he worked as a janitor in an apartment building and got a cheap, free rent. And so he was, this is a picture of his dad working as a janitor. And one of the odd things is that there was this is a drawing of his father that he did when he was a young man, before, while he was only in high school. And so the building on the right is Walter Baumhofer's building in Brooklyn on Bushwick Avenue. And the building right next to it is 1502 Bushwick. And that's where the plumber lived, who was another German immigrant named George Gould. And he, if there was any repairs in the neighborhood, George Gould would be the guy to do it, because Baumhofer's father was not really a skilled, he was just a janitor who would say, okay, fine, we've got problems with a broken window, we'll send it to the hardware store, they'll put the glass in and stuff like that. But if you have a plumbing problem, we'll go to George Gould. And if the name rings a bell, that's John Fleming Gould, from this fighter and everything else, was a next door neighbor and best friend of Walter Baumhofer when they were growing up. But there was 2 years difference, I think, between their ages. Baumhofer, when he was a kid, was incredibly talented kid. He was a musician, he was a writer, he was also an artist. He was mainly a musician. He was a violinist and won awards for it and performed publicly. And Gould was actually the artist on the block. And so he was the guy that could draw, and everyone looked up to him as the artist. And Baumhofer was just, he was 2 years older, was just a guy who was kind of interested in art. But Gould was actually the neighborhood artist. And this is a much later picture of Walter Baumhofer. I just wanted to show to illustrate the story, because he was, posing for some silly, villain or whatever. But if you look closely, I'll get ahead of myself. He actually, one time, playing in the basement in his dad's workshop, he was goofing around with some World War I ammunition and blew 3 fingers off of his left hand. So Walter Baumhofer had a devastating accident and formative experience when he was, 10 years old, and lost his thumb and 2 fingers, the ends of 2 fingers. And you can see this is very rare. It took me years to find the photograph. I knew the story, and I knew Baumhofer growing up, but he was very bashful about it. He actually had a synthetic left hand that he wore covering his fingers, and always, have favored the right hand and wouldn't show it that much. But anyway, so here's a photo. It's really gruesome, but it's not just for sensationalism. It's just part of the story of the character. I think it's kind of interesting that you can see his thumb is gone, and his index finger is entirely there in his left hand, but his other 2 fingers are missing the upper digits. So this is impossible for a talented violinist. So he became very despondent, and his pal next door said, I think his exact words were, you're not fit for manual labor anymore. So just forget about getting a job or anything. You're never going to be a violinist. You've got to start becoming an artist, because then you can work with your right hand. And he says, I'm an artist. It's easy. I'll teach you if you can't get it down. And so this cocky little guy next door set him on the road to becoming an artist. And he had not really thought about himself in that way at all before. So it became a very formative thing for him. So please forgive this gruesome sensationalism, but it's interesting. Here's a picture of the high school that Baumhofer went to, which is a very important high school for kids in New York City, commercial high school, where you learn all types of trades and stuff. And, there's pictures of 1 million kids in this. This is the graduating class. But right next to the principal, you can see Walter Baumhofer. And there's another guy, I don't know if anyone knows Dave Berger, who did a lot of covers for Adventure and stuff, but he's in this picture too. This is Julius Berger. Just an interesting thing, but Julius Berger and Walter Baumhofer then were great friends their whole life, and so, but he's just a pal from that school. Here's his little diploma from high school, and they really didn't have that great art classes at the high school, but he went to the Brooklyn Museum, which was close by, and they had many years a Brooklyn Museum Art School, which was what they call now an education department, and they had weekend classes for kids for free. And it was an extremely good school, and I actually went there myself. And while there, he entered all types of contests, and he won an important award. And this is a newspaper article that came out a couple weeks after he graduated high school. And he'd won a citywide poster contest. And there's a little picture of Walter Baumhofer, and that's an artwork by him. And the article's, it's actually a great article. I don't want to bore you with it, but it's interesting when it describes his life. And he says he really wants to be a poster artist because he thinks that's what's so important. And he's a little cocky. They actually joke about it because he's 17 years old. But they say, well, what makes you want to be an artist? He goes, well, seeing my work all over town with this thing, it's really done something to convince me. I think maybe this is something I have a certain skill at doing, you know. It makes one feel a certain way, he said. And so this is actually great because Walter Baumhofer, I really love him. And he was really like that. It was like, he was, you know, a great artist and a sensational character. And he was not shy to tell you that he was too. But what can you do? He's really talented. What do we got here? So he wanted that thing, a full scholarship to go to Pratt, which was a very good art institute in Brooklyn. And this is an actual picture of the class in 1923, the first year that he was there. And, you know, it's just a great art school. It's hard to imagine how many different people, if you're into Pulps, went to that school at that time. But, you know, one of the important things was that Dean Cornwell was a great artist and did lots of blue book covers, and was one of the teachers there. But they also had visiting artists that came by, like N.C. Wyeth and Norman Rockwell and Charles Dana Gibson. And these were all people that taught the young Walter Baumhofer when he was a kid. And, you know, he had, this is one of his sketches he did as a kid in college. It's a 3-year art program. There's no degree. So it's not really college, but it would be 3 years after high school. So it's often considered 3 years. These are the actual, this was in the yearbook the year before graduating. So these are pictures of different teachers at the school that was posted in the thing. The guy with the artist palette is Nicholas Riley, and he taught many of the greatest pulp artists that went to that school. Here's just a little picture of him from his yearbook. And I thought this was interesting because, again, you could see what kind of a weird character he was. That his portrait, you have a standard portrait, then you have kind of an informal portrait. His informal portrait is backwards, blindfolded. And he seems to have a stick in his hand. So I guess he's playing blind man's bluff or something. But it's just cute that he would think of showing himself that way. And this is one of his other students just below him in the yearbook, which is just kind of startling to see Rudy Bolarski right there also. But of course, they were great friends, and you know, one grade behind them was Frederick Blakesley. It's just unbelievable. So this is Bolarski, in case you forget who he was. And that's one of his nice argosy covers. And again, John Fleming Gould went to school with him at Pratt the whole time. Another guy most people don't know a lot about is Frank Kramer, who did plenty of illustrations in Sports Story for Street and Smith, but also I think he did some drawings in The Shadow, and this one cover for short stories. Wow, the color looks pretty bad in here for some reason. You notice that? It's fucked up. How is that? It looks fine here, yeah. Maybe it's the buttons on the screen. So here's David Berger, Julius David Berger. Again, what I said earlier, there's a little picture of him in commercial high school with him. And John Gunnison and I, for years, thought that that signature underneath it said, looks like WB was Walter Baumhofer. But it's DB. Finally cracked the code. It's his first letter D, written in a way, I think, to actually, benefit from the mistake that it might be Walter Baumhofer, like in terms of selling stories or something. But they were dear friends forever and ever. This is one of the other dear friends that he met at Pratt, which is Alarita Leach. And she was a real live wire. And he wound up 5 years after graduating marrying and spending their whole life together. And she was born in August 20th, 1903. So she's more than a year older than him. And she was an only child. Her father was Frank and her mom was Anna Leach. And the dad was a traveling salesman for the Portland Cement Company in Portland, Maine. And she was one of those kind of typical kids of the young ladies, I should say, of the free spirit, live wire kind of, I don't know if you know what Mel Brinkley is, but it's the idea of the girl, Clara Bow kind of thing, just, what is it? Flapper? Like a flapper, yeah. But she was, not entirely, the opposite of the Victorian concept of what a woman should be, so they were kind of wild or something. And she really was like that. And so she graduated, and when she, immediately got a job working in Graphic House in New York, lived in Greenwich Village with artists, writers, sculptors, actors, in her whole building. And she started to get quite a very good career. And I think she was doing this Golden Book cover, which is far more important than anything Baumhofer had done until this time. And she did, a lot of illustrations, and was a sensational in a way. This was more literary type magazine. They would have serialized novels by Scott Fitzgerald or something like that. And this is her in her 30s. But I didn't want to do her parallel thing, but she had a whole career, her whole life, and this is like her 50s designs that she did that were very hip and, generated money or whatever. And in the 60s she made these things, so she actually had a whole career making her own stuff. And just to get back to Walter Baumhofer, these are the signatures he was using when he first got out of school. And a lot of things, I was amazed to find that after he passed away, I was privileged to look at, catalogs of the estate and stuff like that. And one of the things that blew me away was that he seemed so reckless and fun and flamboyant and stuff. But like a German, he also had carefully detailed notations of everything he sold. He had all of his tear sheets of everything he did, and dates, and all his sketches, and as many of the paintings as he could keep. But most of the artists never kept their stuff. So it was amazing to me to find that over 700. I actually stopped counting, I'm ashamed to say, because it's just too many. Black and white pen and ink illustrations found with these two signatures from when he graduated until 1933. And we always entirely think of him as the king of the pulps. We mean the king of the covers of pulps, not the interiors. But that's a phenomenal amount of work that was in, Far West Illustrated, Cowboy Stories, all the Hersey Pulps, Adventure. There's tons and tons of these type of illustrations that I would have never thought were by Walter Baumhofer. But you can see a little WB next to the earring of the guy. And the Mystery Magazine blew my mind. This was so familiar to me, but I didn't know Baumhofer did it. But there's a WB down the corner over there, left corner. Okay, so this is his first cover. This is a cold cover. And supposedly the story is that the person who graduated 2 years ahead of him is H. Winfield Scott, who did so many covers for Western Story. And there was such an upturn in enrollment at the school that at prep that they hired him to come back as a teacher. So Baumhofer was then being taught by someone who, was only 2 grades ahead of him. But he had said to him, "What are you saving yourself for? You should paint covers. Don't just keep trying to milk this thing, get a little money doing pen and inks." But Baumhofer really wanted to be a poster artist, which actually means something more like advertising is what we would call it nowadays, which would be, large, heavily graphic type images, which actually is what Alarita Leach was doing. So it's interesting that the two of them were thinking of becoming, poster artists. Like Toulouse-Lautrec is a poster artist. That's what he would call himself. And he's a super graphic type artist. But then he took Scott's advice and started making painted covers. And this is one of the first ones. So they got married on June 28th, 1930. And they moved to an apartment on 216th Street in Broadway, way at the very, very top of the island, 70 Terrace, Park West. And they never had any children, and they were both such kind of palsies. Like he called her Pete all the time, was her name, Pete. She signed a lot of her work Rita Leach, and so that must have been a nickname also. But I think they kind of had one of those, I don't know if it's a stretch to say like Zelda Fitzgerald and Scott Fitzgerald, but they had creative lives and stuff. They weren't really, they were mainly just going to have fun, kind of, and explore themselves and be free spirits. And I think that was their kind of prenuptial agreement or something, because that's what they did. They had fun. But obviously in 1933 he became, some more of those little spots that we don't normally think of Walter Baumhofer art. But again, it's right by the telephone pole. You can see the WB over there. But I would have never known if I didn't know that he had these, and they were in his little logbook. I thought this was just a cute one. You can see the drawing. It's a flip of the same person. Identical for some reason. And this is the first cover he ever did for the magazine Street and Smith publisher, which he had a very long relationship with. And so here you see these are early ones that he was doing, and they have very graphic style. They are more like poster art than what we normally think of. And I think even the spider has a similarity to this painting. It's just like a giant clinging hand, and again, it's very graphic. It's like it's not really a net, that's a cartoon of a net, it's like big white lines and stuff. And this is one of these great things. They actually had this, I remember when I was a kid, they would photograph people walking down the streets in New York and then give you the card, and they, if you give them 50 cents or $1, they would mail you the photograph. And if you told them to go to hell, they wouldn't, And so it was like a fun thing. This is an actual guy clicked him on the street delivering an artwork in Midtown Manhattan. That's a fun thing to find. So here's 1933, another classic image that we're all celebrating today. I'm just horrified that has such beautiful images. And that's a lot of effort to get these, and you're looking at them in solarized color. I have no idea. Can anyone fix this? This is terrible. I'm horrified. Scott, it will go away. No, he went to a huge effort to photograph. He owns this painting. And this is what I'm showing you. I'm so ashamed. But if you want to come up here and look at it, we have beautiful, high-quality pictures that we took of this stuff. Please forgive me. This is a funny thing. A lot of people think that Bill Cuff, the character on the right, was the model for Doc Savage. I've not been able to identify the other model, who you see on a lot of pulps, but this is a photograph that Walter Baumhofer had of these two guys. I think that the hair is similar to Baumhofer more than the other guy. There's definitely a hair problem going on there. So the nose and the ear is identical.
the ears, like his hair was the same. Creepy. But he has this great haircut. He always did kind of have that hair. And this is a self-portrait he drew, and it's like his goofy hair he's so proud of. And this is a later illustration that he did just for Red Book or something, Cosmopolitan. And it just has this great Doc Savage type hair, I think. So here's some famous docs. Dude, I hate looking at these color pictures. This is one of his carefully noted pages from his logbook. And it's just a thrill, actually, if you look at it in minutiae, because the dates start chronologically, 1934 to mid-1935, the end of 1935. And the PR is Pete Rice. The DS is Doc Savage, that's in the first column over there. And you'll see the price that he's paid for them is $100 at first he was paid, and then it changed to $125. So that's the date of delivery and the date of payment, because you have to make sure you get paid. But these are all Doc Savage covers. Can you believe that? And Pete Rice covers. And WW is Wild West, and WWW is Wild West Weekly. This is fun. I just found this photograph in his stuff, and it's a reference photograph, probably. This is a painting he gave my dad. So we've had this my whole life when I'm growing up. I would have preferred this one. So this one's like a horrifying picture. Everyone's like, what the hell is he thinking, you know? And so I found this photograph of his mother. So she must have been very happy about that. So I just wanted to show, that Baumhofer himself, is a super talented guy. He really was. And very, very interested in life and not sitting around in his butt kind of thing. He was always active and doing fun things and had a real fascination with making better work. And, part of it, his role was being kind of a stage director or something like that, I was thinking. And so these are, actors, or just himself, like in this case, acting like a goofball for a photograph, as a reference photo in a project or something. He's madly in love with this cat. He's always talking about it, John. But he loved his pets, But in the back you can see that adventure cover. And that's his studio. And there's another adventure cover on the easel. And this is a firehouse downtown in Lower Manhattan where they have a fireboat, and that's the fire captain. And this was all still there, during my childhood and stuff. And you can see the Wall Street in the back, in that little tiny corner up there. You can see all those skyscrapers and stuff. And he's right on the edge of the water of the Hudson Bay, what's it called? Harbor. And so this was, a photo shoot that he was making to do these sailor paintings, photographs of the stuff on the boats. And this is a Japanese model. And that's Baumhofer, I don't know, performing some other role in the background. He became very good, very successful, but he was going up to $125 for a cover, and that's it. And he's working for Adventure, Doc Savage, Stephen Smith. There's nowhere to go, nowhere higher. But $125 is a lot of money in 1935, 37. But by 1938, he was, getting sick of it and wanted to make more money. And you could make more like 800, 900, 1,000 per the same painting in Slick magazines, which had wider distribution, but they were mainly funded by the advertisers. So they had massive amounts of advertising money, kind of like the thing with baseball teams that they, not really the tickets, it's how much advertising money they make. So there's a whole other business of making magazines in order to carry Kellogg's cornflakes ads, and that was really the major stage for advertising in America because there wasn't television yet, and they couldn't advertise in the movies, and so they couldn't, there wasn't that much money in billboards. No one had cars in the 1930s, so it's like, the radio was a huge source of advertising funding. But the established source of advertising funding from the 1920s on had been Slick magazines. And their formula was to make some sort of entertainment fiction that was appealed to the entire family, and it wouldn't be specifically for, juvenile mentality or for violent men or for, so it had to be somewhat wholesome. It had to be inoffensive to the advertisers because that was really what it was all about. So you found a very different type of fiction in Slick magazine versus Pulps. And Baumhofer really was great in the Pulps. He was a very, very talented artist, but he was just another Slick illustrator. But he went into the Slicks and, made much, much more money than anyone else that didn't. And so it was a wise move and stuff, but I don't think today he has a single follower from, that gee whiz, I really loved his love story illustration in Cosmopolitan from 1947 or something. I don't think there's a market at all. There are not enough historical interest in it or something. But, he had a real flair for the kind of reckless adventure stories that were acceptable in the Pulps. And so it's basically an element of self-expression that was permitted in artists in the Pulps that was not permitted in the Slicks, where they were extremely cautious about offending, the sponsor, so to speak. On a radio show, maybe he did an analysis. So here he actually set up a fancy self-portrait as a great artist. And I don't want to belabor it, but again, you can see he's kind of hiding his left hand. So it's very typical of that. When I first heard the story, my dad told me, and I was like, well, I never noticed it when he was over here and stuff like that. But he wouldn't show it, and so then I ended up trying to get photos. It was very difficult. There was no photos of him exposing it. But anyway, so he bought this house out in Northport, Long Island, in 1945. And of course, he's missing those fingers, so he can't serve in the war either. But he did, along with a lot of other illustrators, go to the hospitals and draw the wounded veterans and give them the drawing. It was a really cool program. It was set up by the New York Society of Illustrators. And they had 400 volunteer illustrators making these drawings. They actually made 4 million illustrations of soldiers. And they're all documented and saved in the Pentagon. I didn't know there were 4 million wounded people but if you were in the hospital, you could be there for any reason. So it was just guys in hospitals. But here, that's just a cool picture of him in his studio looking at his own little rack that he set up of old magazines, and a lot of them have his illustrations from Red Book. Here's that same cat that's in the other photograph in his studio. And this is just a cool little shot that he set up, in an actual candy store, photographing it. And there's a painting. And that's the cover of the American, which I think is the American Legion magazine. This is Baumhofer in front of his house. This is a cool little sequence. This is a model and her a little pooch. And that's the painting she made, and that's another cover from that. So here we are up to 49, and he right away in 1938 he got an agent. So the agent was getting him stuff for magazines, books, posters, and his correspondence with him gets more and more, you know, like, well, where's the work? Where's the money? How come I have to take less this time? You can just see it happening, like the actual illustration art, which I try to think of in a way as sort of classic illustration, was becoming extremely old-fashioned, basically, as television came in. And so, aside from whether what killed the Pulps question, something else really killed illustration art also. And the final milestone was that the Saturday Evening Post fired Norman Rockwell in 1962. And it's just like, we don't need you anymore, go home. And so, everything was color photography, and it was basically, the key word was unfashionable. So if you're worried about the advertisers and whether they're going to be offended or not, they were offended by looking at classic illustration art. So the whole American history kind of talented artists that had art school training and were thinking of themselves as somehow an extension of, say, Renaissance art or Western painting, was coming to an end. And basically with, the 1960s with pop art, there was a real huge trend in illustration to use things that were more graphic, more like Alarita was doing in a sense. And everything else looked really bad and old-fashioned. So there was almost no places for them to work. And Baumhofer was, not built for that. He was really a superstar, and it was tough for him to try and figure out what to do. So he was making these posters that were calendar art, and I think they're written in his memo book, but he gets like $300 for it. But by 1960, $300 is not that much. So this is like 1962 during the excitement over the Civil War thing, but how many posters did they sell really? So here's this old friends back, have reinvented themselves, Fawcett and Harris Deeger, and they're making different types of men's adventure type magazines, Argosy, Outdoor Life. And so Baumhofer started working again for these guys, which is not really slick anymore, but it's the only real outlet for narrative painters of representational scenes that were, storytelling by a real illustrator. I mean, an illustrator with academic talent. So like this, there must be 40 or 50 different reference photos and drawings for this one illustration that he had, and he worked on it a lot, and he got $125 for it. And 1967, and he'd gotten 125, for the Pulps in 1934. So it was tough. So he spent a lot of time, trying to drum up stuff and keep up his spirits and stuff. But he was really thrilled when he was rediscovered by pulp fans, and this one issue of Xenophile is dedicated to him in 1979. And as soon as he got it, he sent it to my dad in the mail and was just crowing about how he'd been discovered, and they now know that I really am the king of the pulps. And sorry, no. So this is just a copy of the letter that he sent. But I don't want to read it all, but it's very last paragraph. He says, I've been to one PulpCon, number PulpCon 8, was presented with a plaque which was inscribed to Walter Baumhofer in appreciation of his many artistic achievements, PulpCon 8, Dayton, Ohio. Very flattering, I must say. Do let's keep in touch. And here's his plaque. And in 1983, 3 years later, he was contacted by some fans that were trying to make a new Spider comic, and they said, well, could we get him out of retirement and have him make and so they were working on a design of how they would have the comic, and there's about 7 drawings I've seen that are him trying to refine the idea of a Spider comic, because he'd done the first Spider ever, but I don't think it ever happened. I've never seen the final product. And unfortunately, just a few months after this, he had a riding accident, and Mr. Flamboyant Zorro was out riding again and fell off and hurt himself, and actually broke his spine, and spent the last 2 years not very well at all. That's the end. He says, any questions up there? Got a question? Go ahead. Are there plans to do a Baumhofer book? Would anyone in the room like to lose $20,000 or $30,000? Please. I would love to do a book. I don't want to fund the book. And we happen to know that this is the entire extent of the interest in... there might be a 2 or 3 outside, but... So each of you would have to spend at least $600 to buy the book. So no, it's hard to do it, but you know, I think in the future we're just going to have to go digital and make Baumhofer websites or something like that and make it free, you know, because you could tread water just as easily making a website as you can tread water and publishing without all the aggravation and stuff. Yeah. What's up?
Would you like to work on a Baumhofer website?
Sure. Yeah, it's easy, you know, because I love Baumhofer. I love his work. It's great thinking about how great these guys are. And, you know, putting the thing together is the most fun part of it. But then, you know, paying for the printing and dealing with the fact that you don't sell any copies is just too much, you know. Are they? Oh, right, right. Well, everyone tells me that, you know, paper's out, you know. So, just, I guess I forgot to mention that on September 23rd, 1987, he died at the age of 82. Just to be a completist about it. All right, well,
Over the year again when he was a guest of honor. I know I was there, but
79, said, yeah.
he must have worn that fake closet or something.
Yeah.
I met him and his wife. But I quoted,
You didn't notice it, yeah.
no, well, no. I'm not sure that-
Well, yeah, too, and it's just the
Yeah.
little digits. The first finger's okay, it's these two are just missing a little bit of it, and most of the thumb is
Stupid
not.
question, but I'm assuming he wasn't actually right. I mean,
I never asked him.
no, what I mean, did he do it with his right hand or with his right?
Yes, he did, yeah.
Because I'm a lefty, it's not easy to train yourself to be right.
Everyone's so impressed that Leonardo da Vinci was left-handed.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. And then it goes on and on. So many, you know, talented artists are left-handed.
Do you have any other memories, particularly
Oh, no, just fun memories is all I have. No, he was great. He was really nice. He was just full of energy and happiness, and he was irrepressible. Sometimes when people say, like, gee, I'd like to be an artist, I just think, oh, no, you know, you don't have to be born one, you know, because this guy was different, you know, he wasn't just, like, learned a skill or something. He was a really flamboyant person, you know. He was, one time he left, and when he walked out, Dad said, "Yeah, that guy's like 1,000,000 watts." You know? Yeah, it was good.
Personal portrait.
A couple, yeah. Yeah, but not, yeah. No, not really. It's funny, yeah. I mean, he did the drawings of his family when he was little, pending drawings of everyone in his family. But I think, you know, because of, in terms of that, like, log book, but everything that he made, he wrote down, and he sold, and when he received it, and when it was spun. And I think the idea, then suddenly, he had like a separate section in the back. It's like independent works. It was like 5 things on the list, you know. But it was like, you know, why? You know, like, you're going to write down that you made a drawing of your wife and, like, what, I gave it to her this day. It's so weird. You know? But he was a very orderly guy, but I just wanted him more of the flamboyant guy. But a lot of people say, like, how do they go around selling their work and stuff like that? They really were, because I knew a lot of them, and they really were flamboyant people. They were I don't know, when I say like Jimmy Durante or somebody, just like, they're real, crazy characters. They're loud and funny and entertaining. And practically all the pulp artists that were freelance illustrators had that superpower, you know.
Any stories about his brother?
Yeah, his brother worked for an oil import company, his older brother, and again, I think it's interesting that he got the job. They were poor, and when he graduated high school, which is actually saying a lot at that particular time in America, as for immigrant children. So that just says a lot. It's like, I think, less than 12% of people in America that graduated high school in 1918. After women got the right to vote, there was a move to build schools all across the country. And so during the 1920s, almost all of the schools were built, that were then replaced maybe in the 60s or something. So it was unusual in New York, in a poor family, to send both sons all the way to high school because you usually get him out to work. But he got out to work and worked as a clerk, which is what his father had first been doing at the coffee import company. He worked as a clerk in an oil import company. It was kind of like he was going back and finishing his father's career, and he remained in that job his entire life. So it's kind of interesting here that, again, it's kind of, it's just interesting that the struggle, how do you survive in New York? And again, they didn't change their name. And many Germans did if they had a overly German-sounding name during the First World War. So it just says something like, Who?
His brother.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Still Baumhofer.
The little Baumhofer still living around. Every Christmas they send me a card. Okay.
Was he or any of the other pulp artists upset that after he sold the paintings to the publishers and stuff and they used it, that they just basically threw their paintings away?
No, I know. It's hard for us outsiders to quite appreciate the way that worked, but absolutely not. Another part of their being, I think, kind of like a Jimmy Durante type of person. Like, let's say they had showmanship in their blood somehow. They were like fearless in a way in terms of going in. Because actually, you really can't sell pulps on your reputation. They're only buying it because they like the way it looks a lot. And they had a very firm conviction that their sales were connected with the attractiveness of the cover. That's what most of the editors felt. And if they looked at it and said, no, damn it, it's just not going to sell as many, get out of here. It was like kind of brutal in that way. And so they really needed to be flamboyant and similar to go around. And they couldn't be wallflowers or something like that. And when they would think of a new composition, they were thinking of what is more outrageous than what I last did. And it's not like it all goes towards something, like a hideous mess or something that's just like explosions. But it's, they were trying to outdo themselves in something more spectacular all the time. And so they actually developed the opposite of what we think of as the artist in the ivory tower who's working on this perfect thing for many, many years to just get it right. They're the exact opposite approach to art, And I don't think that one is better than the other at all. It has everything to do with the value of art is that it's self-expressive and that we get to know what other human beings are thinking and stuff. So it's a real intimate way to actually connect with other people, like literature. And so if a person's spirit is that they're like, a flamboyant screwball, their work is going to be more impressive, but that's also genuinely who they are. They're really not capable of suddenly writing, a heartbreaking romantic poem or something like that. That's not in their blood at all. They're not that way. So they're very brutal about, they had to develop very thick skins and they had to be callous. And so when they weren't getting jobs and the career and the whole system began to collapse for them, it was very hard for them to start whining about it because they were very, they lived kind of in the jungle, a dog eat dog. They're very, very competitive. They would destroy each other. If they saw someone else did something better, they would try to outdo it. And they sued each other if they felt they were copying. Baumhofer sued George Gross. And felt that he was stealing his design and stuff. So the idea that they would say, "Oh, can I get my painting back?" or something like that, it just doesn't work. You know, they were like, "Hey, the painting's gone. You know, I want another one now." You know. One other thing that people don't know: after they photographed the paintings, they actually threw them out. And so there was actually a step. They'd say, "Great, stamp it, throw it over, put it over here." The guy would photograph it, and then they would go into a bin. Now, if they were saved, it was the people took them out of the bin. The bin was meant to be destroyed. And so, of course, they didn't go back and say, "Where's my thing?" You know, it's like they were actually thrown out. But, you know, many have survived. Compared to, can we consider the fact that they were actually disposed of, you know?
I heard quite a few years ago, and I don't know if that's actually because when I first began collecting secondhand, oh, that's Baumhofer. Find out later when I was young, all the way. And his work became like this after a while. I
Yeah.
heard by somebody years ago, the publisher said, make your style more like Baumhofer.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yes. And it actually grated on a lot of people's nerves. And John Fleming Gould, which was his best friend for so many years, said, he was like angry about it. He said, according to Harry Steger, Baumhofer could do no wrong. And he was like, I think he was pissed about it. You know?
I can tell the difference now, 20 years ago,
Yeah. Well, one time my dad was fired he got into a fight with Ziff Davis, and you know, they fired him, and the editor, Kurt Rogoff, at the time was the art editor, and he told me that the second Dad walked out the door, Ziff Davis said to him, "Get me some guy to paint exactly like Walter Saunders to replace him, because, you know, he did all these covers for us." And he said, "I then spent the worst 6 months of my life, because you can't really get someone that can paint exactly like another artist." So he was hiring all these guys that were very talented: DeSoto, Alan Anderson, Clarence Dorr. Telling, "Can you make more like a fake Saunders? No, that's not good enough. Can you make it more like a fake Saunders?" So there are all these paintings that they did for Ziff Davis that are sad, because they're like efforts to imitate another artist. But I'm sure that Harry Steger's crazy mad love for Baumhofer did compel Lovell if he wanted that work. But Lovell didn't really want that work. He's an interesting character because he actually went to college, a genuine college, like these guys, and he had real academic studying, and he was really not destined for the Pulps at all. So he was really going somewhere else anyway. So, yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.